How much horsepower does a horse actually produce? How much semen does a blue whale produce? Why are wombat poops square? And there are also square starfish. These are all things I learnt this week. Let's dive into that. So on to the next big question. What shape is a wombat's bumhole? Now I know you've all been wondering about it for a while, so here I am to enlighten you. Now bear with me on this because there is actually some quite unique science here. I'm not just being crude and childish. Wombats are actually the only animal on the planet to produce square or cubed poops. And that genuinely makes them unbelievably unique and rare. They are the only species on the planet to do it. If there was another animal that was the only species on the planet to do something, that would warrant some investigation. Now obviously I agree this one just feels a little bit weird, but it's still an incredibly unique ability. It also gets slightly weirder because there's a reason that wombats make square poops, and they actually stack their poos on top of each other. And the bigger the stack, the better. They're trying to communicate with other wombats, mark their territory, etc. So the bigger the stack, the more impressive and the more the scent spreads. Now all that makes me think of is some sort of disgusting poo-based Lego product. Like, kids, I've got some Lego for you. Why aren't you playing with your Lego? Anyway, so that leads us to the next big philosophical question. Square peg, round hole. How does it work? Just imagine a Battenberg being squeezed through a toilet roll. It doesn't make sense. But luckily, our top scientists, they are thinking about these big questions too. And a team of scientists from Georgia State University have actually genuinely been investigating this. So what did they find out? Well, they actually found out that a wombat's bumhole is nothing special. It's just like any other one, just like yours and mine. So how did it make square poops? Well, here's where it gets a little bit weird. The scientists were inserting balloons into the anuses of animals and inflating them to compare what happened. So they put some balloons inside the intestines of some wombats and some pigs, and they inflated them to compare and see what happens. Now all this gives me is some picture of our brightest minds. Some poor little wombat just stood there in the lab, balloon shoved up its anus, inflated. All I can imagine is like, "Oi, Dave, get over here. We've got a super stretchy one," and they're all running over like, "Oh yes!" Obviously it didn't quite go like that. They were already deceased, and obviously they cut them open and inserted them into the large intestine or the small intestine. And so it turns out that wombats have an extra elastic part of their digestive system, their intestines just towards the end. And because it is able to stretch and bend, it's able to shape the poo into the cubes. So it's completely normal all the way through the digestive system until it reaches the end, and that's how they produce their square poops. Square peg, round hole, answered. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe. So the next question is, how much horsepower does a horse actually produce? Now I know that sounds like a stupid question. It's a little bit more complicated than it sounds. A single horse can actually produce up to around 15 horsepower at its maximum capacity and output, but obviously that is only for a very short time. So what actually is a horsepower as a unit of measurement? It was actually originally designed as a unit of measuring the work done across a whole day of sustained effort. So it's the amount of work and force that a horse can do across a whole day of effort. And that, on average, a horse produces 1 horsepower across a whole day. Now that makes sense because it was used as a comparison for machines, engines, steam engines, workforces, things that were going to be pulling, pushing, doing work for a long period of time. And it was originally brought about as a unit of measurement to compare the first engines to how much force they could output and work they could output compared to a horse across a whole day. So I was browsing the internet the other day and I saw a fact that I just honestly couldn't believe. It stated that a blue whale produces 1,800 litres of semen on every ejaculation. And I was just like, there's no way. I had a look at this and that is the same as 11 bathtubs worth of semen. Now, that is just, I was like, no. This cannot be true. Now, that would weigh 1,800 kilos. A blue whale is the biggest animal to pretty much have ever lived. It weighs around 130,000 kilos, roughly. So that weight is the same as 1/72th of their own body weight. There is no way they are producing that much semen every time they ejaculate. I know I've said ejaculate quite a few times now, but here we are. Just for context, if a human was to produce that same supposed volume of semen, that would be a kilo's weight of it every single time. As an example, humans only produce about 1/10,000th of their body weight. So this obviously led me down a pretty weird scientific rabbit hole, or in this case, whale hole, and I started researching. Now, it turns out a blue whale produces about 20 litres of sperm, or semen, which is slightly different, per ejaculation event. I didn't really think I'd ever be on the internet talking about ejaculation events from whales, but here we are. For context, that is actually about 1/10 of a bathtub, as opposed to 11. To be fair though, that is still quite a disturbing amount. In fact, it is 4 times the amount of blood as is in the average human's body, so it is still quite a lot of fluid. Now, the problem is there is no real data to back up a lot of these claims, because let's be honest, what scientists are out there trying to sort of measure ejaculation events of blue whales? How would they even do that? There's just so many questions there, so there really isn't much data to back up any of this content, but the general estimates were around this 20 litre mark. So all it really shows you is don't believe everything you see on the internet, because 1,800 litres is just a ridiculous statement. You've got to check your whale semen facts, people. Now, like any sane person, that obviously led me to think, well, how big is their penis? So it turns out that thing is an absolute weapon. Obviously, it is the longest in the animal kingdom, and it can reach anywhere from 2.5 to 3 meters long. Like, that is 8 to 9 foot in length. That is almost double the height of me. So that thing is just ridiculous. It also leads to how big are their testicles? And each testicle of a blue whale can weigh anywhere up to 68 kilos, which is as heavy as a lot of people. So the proportions here are just absolutely huge. You'll be pleased to know I'm now moving on from whale genitalia. So sticking with the theme of squares, it turns out there are square starfish, and I just honestly couldn't believe this. It turns out it comes from a very rare birth defect which disrupts the normal symmetry of their body form, but it's actually quite bad for the starfish. It hinders their ability to forage, to move, to escape predators, and also to regenerate parts of their body, which they're usually quite good at. Now, it's extremely rare, and so it really hasn't been studied. And the exact cause isn't really known. It's not very well understood. But all I can imagine is some poor little starfish going on his first day to school, and just all the other kids or all the other little starfish are just ripping into him because he's just a bloody square. And he just goes home. His mum's there like, "Oh, don't worry, son. We're all quite unique in our own way." And he just looks at him and he's just a square. It's just completely ridiculous. And it's just so brutal because they are literally called starfish. It's the one thing that they have, the one thing, their whole identity as a species from what we've named them is starfish. And it's just a square. How do you explain to your little starfish baby that they're a square? Now, as always, you just got to be slightly careful with everything you read on the internet, because it turns out there are actually species of starfish called biscuit starfish that have very similar body forms to sort of the square starfish. They have this flattened shape. They literally do look like biscuits made in the shape of starfish, but that is normal. They are not square starfish, so you just got to be careful about that distinction. This was a new style of video that I thought I would try. Let me know if you liked it. Let me know if there's anything else you'd like me to include in the next one, or anything cool or weird or interesting that you know.